In every crime, a story of a survivor, of someone left behind, of someone determined to solve a mystery. These are the stories of crimes that changed lives forever. This is Justice Rules.
More than a decade ago, a young college student was found strangled along the banks of North Carolina's Catawba River. Irina Yarmolenko was just 20 years old, a student at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Her murder shocked the community. It led to an intense investigation, rewards for information, and ultimately the arrest of 2 men. But the moments leading up to Ira's death left very little clues about what happened to the vibrant young woman. Reporter Ken Lemon has been following this case since 2008, and now any closure in Irina Yarmolenko's murder seems to be in turmoil.
It was a seemingly normal and beautiful May Day in 2008, the last day Irina Yarmolenko was seen alive. It was exam week at UNC Charlotte when Ira stepped on campus for the last time, May 5th. The 20-year-old sophomore started her day taking an exam, then spent the rest of the morning running errands. Investigators say Ira stopped at a credit union at around 10:18 a.m. Then less than 20 minutes later, at 10:33, security camera footage shows her dropping off several bags of donations at the Goodwill on University City Boulevard. It was around 10:50 when she stopped at Jackson's Java, a coffee shop where she worked near campus. Then she drove to the Catawba River, 20 miles away, where police say she was going to work on a photography project.
I think that she was looking for a pretty spot to take pictures at.
Around 1:15 p.m., 2 people on jet skis saw Ira's body on the banks of the river in Mount Holly near the Stowe Family YMCA just north of the I-85 bridge.
Yes, County 911.
I'm a boater on the Catawba River. Above the I-85 bridge, there's a car that's run off an embankment, and there's a body laying there. I don't know if they're alive or not.
The last documented moment of her life was grainy surveillance video of her car driving through the YMCA parking lot. Police sent that video to NASA in Florida, hoping it could be enhanced so they could tell if there was anyone with Ira. They were unable to find evidence. The young woman was abducted and determined she must have met her killer down at the river. It was the next day that investigators confirmed it was Ira's body found on the river banks. And 2 days later, an autopsy report revealed she died of asphyxiation. Police were very tight-lipped as they investigated Irina Yarmolenko's death. It wasn't until days after her body was found that they labeled it a murder investigation. I, along with several other reporters, went down to the scene with then Mount Holly Police Chief David Belk as his department tried to find a suspect.
Ira's body was laying right here. Her feet are down at this end and her head is at where your feet are right here. So the vehicle is actually sitting right here with the driver's door open and the back door open. Tree stump right there, straight down, is what her vehicle actually hit. And there we do still have some questions about that, whether it was under power when it went down through there. Obviously, when it's sitting at the stump, it is under power because the front wheels are spinning. I'm not going to try to explain why the front wheels were spinning. All we know is that they were spinning. The actual keys to the vehicle were right up in this area here. How she got outside the vehicle, well, we can play the what if. Obviously, I don't know how she ended up in the position that she was. We have taken the vehicle and taken it over to Belmont and stored it in their facilities over there for security. And we have done an inventory inside the vehicle.
Fingerprints?
We did a latent print search as to what's happened with any that they found. I haven't been instructed as to what's happened with those. Mount Holly's, we are a small town. We have limited resources, and all I did was call for extra resources. I made another call to the SBI. I said, can we do some more?
You said you had some pretty good leads. Do you still have them?
Yes. I had a short conversation with the detectives before we came out here, and they're still following up on the leads. We are convinced that someone did that to her. So that's how our investigation is proceeding.
When you say someone did that to her, can you kind of explain someone drove?
Someone caused her death. Now, whether they drove that vehicle down there, I can't tell you that. If they pulled her out of the vehicle, I can't tell you that either. Simply because I do not know. But I know someone caused her death. and that's who we're trying to find.
But who were they trying to find? Mount Holly police said data from her car's black box indicated that someone was sitting in the driver's seat and the driver's side seatbelt was engaged when it went down the embankment. They also said someone had started Ira's car at the scene, but then nothing. As time passed, investigators turned their focus to two fishermen. On December 12, 2008, 7 long months after the murder, they arrested Mark Carver and his cousin, Neil Cassida. I interviewed Carver from jail. He said he and Cassida were fishing nearby but never saw Ira.
All right. If you can, first off, talk to us about why police say you're behind here.
I don't know why they're saying I done it, because I didn't do it. I didn't even go around the car, didn't even know the car was up there or nothing.
Were you there when this happened?
Yeah, I was fishing down in the hollow.
Were you with Mr. Cassada?
I don't even know the girl. I've never seen her in my whole life.
Were you fishing with your cousin?
Yeah, that's my cousin.
And that's Mr. Cassada?
No, that's Neil Cassidy.
What's that?
Neil Cassidy.
Okay. If you can, talk to us about how this whole process began, how this thing led from you going fishing to you being behind bars.
Well, we was fishing, and we was down there and we heard a scrape. And the next thing we know, the law and stuff started coming. And they showed up and they said there was a girl up there and stuff, you know. But we didn't know nothing about her being up there. No.
What was your first contact with police after that? So you said you heard the scream, but you didn't know there was
I didn't hear no scream, I heard a scrape.
You heard what, scrape?
Scrape.
Okay. And when you heard that, what did you think?
They were scraping the road.
Did you go over to check and see what was happening?
I just kept fishing.
How did you realize something was going on there?
There's a boy on a jet ski started hollering, calling 911.
And did you call 911?
I didn't have no phone.
How did police come in contact with you? I assume they came in contact with you that day.
Yeah, they come in contact with me. They come through behind the YMCA up to that swamp.
And what did they say to you when they saw you there?
They told me not to move, just stay here, we're looking for a body.
How long did y'all end up talking that day?
Probably about an hour.
Did they ever explain to you what they thought you did, why they believed that you're their man?
No. They said they had evidence I done it, and I didn't do it. I didn't go around the car, and nowhere near the car, and nothing. I stayed down there where my Jeep was. I didn't go around it.
What kind of evidence did the police say they had?
They said that they had a DNA in the car, of my DNA and Neil's DNA in the car. And I know that's a lie because Neil left, and they couldn't have got no DNA because I wasn't down there. I didn't go around it. I didn't go around the car.
Cousins Mark Carver and Neil Cassada both maintained their innocence as they prepared to go to trial for murder. Cassada never had his day in court. He died of a heart attack the day before he was scheduled to go to trial in October of 2010. Carver finally went to trial at the Gaston County Courthouse in March of 2011. Here again is Ken Lemon.
His attorney at the time told us Carver was looking forward to his day in court to clear his name. But the state painted a picture of a cold-blooded killer that needed to pay for what he did to a young, innocent woman.
Her feet were near the river, underneath some brush, and in closer inspection she was actually holding some of that brush in her hand.
One of the detectives at the scene took the stand, unsealing the murder weapons, a ribbon taken from a purse in Ira's car, a black drawstring, from her sweater.
This is the blue bungee cord from that was removed from Miss Yarmolenko's neck.
The prosecution said Carver used these items to strangle Ira. The defense argued there was no proof of that because his DNA was not found on any of those.
Mr. Carver didn't do it. There's not enough evidence to let this case go to the jury.
Carver's DNA wasn't there, but an FBI forensic scientist testified that there was a DNA profile from an unknown person on one weapon. The prosecution argued Carver's DNA was washed away.
She was thrown in the river. The river washed away his DNA. That river did not wash away his sins.
The defense said that's absurd.
The state wants to believe that there has been a tsunami from the river that washed it off.
Even though Carver's DNA wasn't found on the murder weapons, the state's experts said DNA evidence showed that he likely touched her car. Prosecutors saying that proved that he lied when he said he was never at the crime scene.
126 million times more likely to be observed from Mark Carver.
The DNA puts this defendant in incredibly close proximity to a recently murdered girl.
And Carver's claim that he never ever seen Ira. A detective testified Carver knew how tall the woman was.
I believe the words he used was a little thing or a little girl. He said that she came up to him about right here.
But the defense argued Carver got that information secondhand and actually said,
I guess I saw it on TV.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Maybe the biggest question in the case is why. The defense proclaimed Carver, a complete stranger, had no reason to murder the UNC Charlotte student.
Why in the world would this man, Mark Carver, kill Irina Yarmolenko?
Even presenting the possibility Ira took her own life. But the prosecution said the two fishermen saw the 20-year-old at the river and took advantage of the situation. They said Carver and Cassida strangled her, then tried to push her car with her inside into the Catawba River.
They murdered this girl, and they want that car and that body in the river where it will not be found.
It only took the jury 5 hours to find Carver guilty of first-degree murder.
The state of North Carolina versus Mark Carver, guilty of first-degree murder.
The judge sentencing him to life behind bars. Ira's older brother couldn't keep silent. He turned to Carver.
I don't know what to say to him.
He thanked the district attorney after leaving the courtroom.
This has been very hard for us, but justice was done here.
When I spoke to one of the jurors right after the trial, he said a turning point for him was that Mark Carver knew Irina Yarmolenko's height. But that video of Carver's interrogation may actually raise some questions about that. He sat in a room with investigators for over an hour, answering questions about what he was doing the day Ira's body was found.
So, once again, you didn't see or hear nothing other than the scraping of what you say sounded like somebody scraping the road. But you didn't see nobody scraping the road. You just heard it. I just heard it. You saw some jet skiers and some normal boat traffic, but you didn't talk to them. You never saw the little girl that got killed. You never saw her call. You never heard her call. Did you ever hear her scream for help?
I didn't hear scream.
You didn't hear her scream at all. She didn't make a sound, did she? Whoever got her on her quick did.
Yeah.
They got their hands around her throat quick, didn't they? Snuffed her out.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Then that bombshell moment where officials say Carver gave himself away.
Had to be somebody big and strong.
Like so, bigger than her. She was a little bitty thing like that.
Yeah.
How much bigger she weighed?
Probably about
110. How tall do you figure she was? She wasn't real tall, was she?
She wasn't real tall. She wasn't much taller than me.
How tall were you?
About 5'4".
So she wasn't much taller than you?
Not what I seen.
If y'all was standing up looking at each other's eyes, but would she be looking you in the eyes?
Yeah, about
Show me, stand up, show me about how tall she was on you.
Probably about right there.
Okay.
I guess. And I don't know.
Yeah, I understand.
The detective who testified at trial said Carver called Ira little. But you can hear it's actually the officer who called her little bitty first. The video was never played for jurors. It's just one reason the North Carolina Center on Actual Innocence says Mark Carver didn't have a proper defense. The group took on his case in 2013. Next, after years of fighting to overturn his conviction, a judge's decision. Does Mark Carver deserve a new trial?
Definitely innocent, 100%.
The shocking turn of events a blow to investigators, and certainly unsettling for Irina Yarmolenko's family.
They're having to relive the horror, and this is very, very sad.
The reason the judge said Carver wasn't properly defended, and the evidence he called doubtful. The North Carolina Center on Actual Innocence filed a motion for appropriate relief on Mark Carver's behalf in 2016. It cited DNA evidence and investigative flaws in its fight to prove his innocence. An evidentiary hearing was held in April of 2019 and then on June 5th. In a move that dealt a blow to investigators, a judge vacated Carver's conviction and ordered a new trial. Ken Lemon was there as Carver walked out of a North Carolina prison.
The judge's order said bluntly Mark Carver's trial attorney failed to properly investigate the case before bringing it to trial, and then at trial failed to present evidence about key factors. Touch DNA was likely the most important, that is, DNA discovered in small amounts, trace cells that can be easily transferred from person to person, place to place. It was a relatively new concept at the time of the trial. It is the only link between Mark Carver and the crime scene. His touch DNA was reportedly found on Irina Yarmolenko's car. Judge C.W. Bragg said Carver's attorney,
He just gave you a fiction.
Brent Ratchford, failed to educate himself on touch DNA before the trial and didn't meet with the SBI crime lab analyst and the state's expert witness. He said during the trial, Ratchford didn't present his own evidence about DNA, which violates the American Bar Association's standards for criminal justice. The judge said Carver's attorney didn't talk to Carver's family or medical experts about Carver's carpal tunnel syndrome, a condition that can limit the amount of pressure a person can apply with his hands. The judge said that would have raised doubt about Carver's ability to strangle a young, healthy, and seemingly fit Ms. Yarmolenko. He said the defense team also failed to consider Neil Cassidy's heart problems that may have made it hard for him to help in the murder. The judge said Carver's attorney also failed to consider his limited IQ. His current attorney said he has the IQ of a child,
Whoever got on it before he did.
and that made him very susceptible to suggestions during the interview with police. The judge said the defense team was granted money for a psychological evaluation but didn't get one, and didn't interview Carver's psychiatrist, the same doctor that Carver met with the morning that Irina Yarmolenko was killed.
As I respect the judge, I think the judge is wrong, because what the judge never addressed was how that would have changed things.
The judge ruled Carver should get a new trial, and in June 2019, he walked out of prison before heading home to wait for his next legal fight. Since that moment, he says he's been spending most of his days with his granddaughter. He spoke with us weeks after his release about what gave him hope behind bars while he fought for his freedom. The man accused of a senseless murder with no apparent motive moved gingerly with a cane in one hand and his attorney's hand in the other.
Are you nervous?
Mark Carver's attorney points to this as evidence that he's innocent.
Does this seem like the Mark Carver who could go and commit this murder?
Yes, said prosecutors. They are certain that Mark Carver is the only living person responsible for the murder of Irina Yarmolenko.
And I hate it happened to her, but it wasn't me and Neil.
Neil Cassidy would have been tried first, but he died of a heart attack the day before his trial. Carver said Cassidy died of wrongful prosecution.
It was hard on him, put a lot of stress on him, because they accused him of something he didn't do.
Carver couldn't avoid trial. He was sentenced to life in prison.
It was long, it was hard. Yeah, especially when you know you didn't do nothing, you're in there for something you didn't do.
His attorney said he was an innocent man with the IQ of a child, trapped in a place with violent offenders.
Sometimes there'd be fights and arguments and stuff. You just had to back off and let them go, you know.
Carver said he survived with help from sympathetic gang members.
Well, they knowed I was innocent and stuff, and they kind of looked out for me, yeah.
He refused to say which gangs helped, but he said he needed support. While his attorneys filed appeal after appeal for 8 years, Carver's faith in securing freedom was waning.
Sometimes I tried to give up.
He said letters to prison from family and complete strangers lifted his spirits.
Where did some of those letters come from?
Everywhere, yeah. And I had people to read it to me because I couldn't read it. They said they couldn't understand why the system failed. They couldn't understand why an innocent man was doing time for something he didn't do. Told me to hold my head up and stuff, not to give up.
Chris Muma from the North Carolina Center on Actual Innocence believes she helped the judge understand what all of Carver's supporters saw so easily.
The evidence that supports that Mark is guilty of this murder is as strong for him as it is for me.
A judge heard her arguments and awarded Mark Carver a new trial.
If not Mark, who?
Someone close to Ira, Chris Muma said. Someone who prepared to kill her.
This was a crime scene of somebody who planned ahead.
She said police and prosecutors wildly missed the mark and believes they need help finding the real killer.
I firmly believe we know more about this case than law enforcement ever knew. So hopefully somebody will ask for our opinion on that.
Carver is out on bond awaiting the next steps in the legal process. He said he put everything that happened before his release out of his mind.
How do you let something like that go?
You have to. I can't do nothing about it.
He spends his time with his 1-year-old granddaughter, born while he was in prison.
She gives me stuff, sits on my lap, talks to me and stuff. She gets used to me.
It's important to remember that this case is all about justice for Irina Yarmolenko, the 20-year-old college student who was taken away from her family and friends too soon. Ira immigrated to America from Ukraine when she was just 7 years old. Loved ones described the young woman as a photographer, a musician, and a poet.
As a choir, as a lover of bodies and beauty, as a fighter of injustice and justice.
Family members said she loved nature and being outdoors. They said she was a trusting and outgoing person. We contacted Ira's brother after Mark Carver's conviction was overturned. He didn't want to comment on the case. The district attorney says he plans to appeal to have Carver's conviction upheld. If that doesn't happen, he says he plans to retry the case. Mark Carver may be at home and out of prison, but it's not over. A new trial could bring to light new evidence to either prove his guilt or his innocence. But one thing is for sure, the 20-year-old college student who lost her life on the banks of the Catawba River deserves justice.
In every crime, a story of a survivor, of someone left behind, of someone determined to solve a mystery. These are the stories of crimes that changed lives forever. This is Justice Rules.
A new look at a decades-old investigation.
I hope that we can get some answers.
Answers to questions simmering for 40 years.
What can we do so that we can look at the surviving family members and say, we have done everything we could possibly do on your child's file?
Boxes of files and a long list of victims. Everyone knows his name. How many remember theirs?
I really want my brother's name and the children's name to have a meaning.
Channel 2 presents The Atlanta Child Murders 40 years later.
Good evening. I'm Channel 2's Jovita Moore.
I'm Justin Farmer. Atlanta's cold case detectives are taking a new look at dozens of murder cases that are 40 years old. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms asked for the review.
We found hundreds of stories on the missing and murdered children's cases in our Channel 2 video archives. Many focused on Wayne Williams, who is serving life in prison for killing 2 men.
But nearly 40 years later, the debate continues into who killed the children and if anyone got away with murder.
Another young boy was found dead.
We're working on links.
I'm still hoping that he's alive.
February 27, 1982, a jury convicted Wayne Williams of the murders of 2 men, Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne.
They reached the conclusion that he was guilty, and there's nobody else, nobody that has spent the same amount of time in going over evidence, and so we really, in our system, don't have a right to second guess them.
2 days later, a special task force closes the book on the child murders. March 21st, 2019, Atlanta native and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms reopens the investigation.
To let them know that we have done all that we can do.
Channel 2's Dave Huddleston sat down with the mayor for a revealing and at times emotional interview about her decision.
For me, as a mother of 4 and as a child who lived through this period in Atlanta, it's just something that has touched me in a way that quite frankly, I don't think I was prepared for. There are times that I still get very emotional just thinking about it and speaking about it, and I think that's the heart of a mother in me.
We obtained this map from the city of Atlanta. The stars highlight where the victims lived. Mayor Bottoms didn't know any of the children, but she did know the neighborhoods.
There was a skating rink, Greenbrier skating rink, that I used to go to every Saturday. I would do my chores on Friday night so I could go on Saturday morning. And I believe the first or second child who went missing was leaving that skating rink. One of the boys was headed down to the Kmart on what was then Bankhead Highway to help cart groceries to the car. My church I grew up in was directly across the street from that Kmart.
So this was right in your community?
It was. It was.
We don't know what we'll find.
In my interview with Chief Erica Shields, she made one thing clear. What are your feelings, Chief? There may be some people who are looking for an outcome for whatever motivation or otherwise that might be different or more thorough than what we have today.
You know, I think what I've really tried to do is keep the team, the folks working on it, very singular focus. Examine this. Let the evidence take you where it takes you. We don't have a desired outcome.
The files are here, inside APD headquarters. On another table, there are stacks of homicide log books. On the wall, you see a list of names, children's names, categorized by how they died.
All of these cases were not looked at to the extent that they needed to be. And that obligation, that doesn't change over the years. We've got to get it right. We've realized that we had a couple of homicides at Niskey Lake area and Redwine. So we took cadaver dogs out to both. We covered about 60 acres at Niskey Lake. Redwine area, we could only do about 15 because there's so much development, to make sure that there wasn't any bones that were out there. So we are also going to the different locations, medical examiner's office, DeKalb County, Fulton County, and there's evidence at all of these locations for a variety of reasons. We haven't found to this point any evidence to be tested, but what they have found when they're rebuilding the files, they are seeing that there were some files that clearly were not Wayne Williams was not the perpetrator, and the file was clumped in with Wayne Williams. And they really feel as though that, given the chance, an arrest of someone else would have occurred. There's a belief that a couple of the other crimes may have been committed by individuals who also ended up in jail. There were a couple of crimes where early indications are it may have been a family member or an accident. So I think it's one of these, it's tempting to take a broad brush and sweep all the homicides up into it, but you really have to look at each one.
And you're saying that maybe that is what did occur because of some of the pressures?
Yes.
That maybe it was just felt better.
Yes.
It just felt better to move on. But even if names are crossed off this list, there's a chance others could be added.
We're also looking at unsolved cases going back several years before and several years after. That number is staggering, and we strongly suspect that the list should likely be longer.
The first victims on the list disappeared in 1979.
A year later, Atlanta police formed a task force and announced that they suspected a pattern to the murders of black children and teenagers.
But an arrest was still almost a year away. Summer 1979, Edward Smith and Alfred Evans disappear within days of each other. Their bodies later found in a vacant lot in southwest Atlanta.
We really need help from the public on this one.
I began as a reporter in '71, and some of the early to mid-'70s years, Atlanta had right at 250 homicides. Atlanta was competing through some of the '70s years with Detroit as the murder capital of the world. So to have some young people being killed was sad, tragic, not shocking.
By the spring of 1980, there were more bodies. Parents of the early victims organized the Committee to Stop Children's Murders.
What I'm saying to you is it's not enough to love your children. You got to love my children. You got to love everybody's children.
Atlanta police created a special task force July of 1980.
Within the period of time we're looking at with the number of kids that have been killed or are still missing, it's not normal.
In August, investigators revealed they suspected a pattern in the child murders.
We have to look at the possibility that there may be some connection between all of the cases.
The task force began compiling what is commonly referred to as the list.
And that list really became an albatross, because if a child disappeared and died and didn't have his or her name put on the list, then there was enormous resentment in that immediate community and in the family that my child doesn't matter. So there was political pressure.
A growing list and growing resentment. Some families openly criticized how police were handling the investigation.
These cases were not investigated the way they should have been investigated, the way they would have been investigated had these kids come out of a different socioeconomic group.
What do you think, when you look back, Anthony, how do you think the Atlanta Police Department handled your brother's case?
Poorly.
State and federal investigators eventually joined the search for Atlanta's child killer. The Reagan administration sent agents and cash. Celebrities raised money to help the city offset the growing cost of an immense investigation.
I've got the world on a string.
In early 1981, investigative reporter Richard Belcher got a tip about a body found in Rockdale County. The victim turned out to be Terry Pugh.
And it's not solved yet, but it's gonna be solved, because we're getting very close. And whoever the killer is, he may be living, he may be dead, but it's some more out there know something.
Soon after police found Pugh's remains came the headline that would change everything.
We've come up with some physical evidence that's common to at least two of the bodies, and it falls into the fiber category.
We had a couple of pretty good sources who told us about the fibers and the animal hairs. The police knew it already, and the FBI knew it already, but the public didn't know that these synthetic fibers had confirmed with virtual certainty that the same killer had killed several of these. They were still considered as children at the time.
After news broke about fibers linking a killer to the young victims, police started finding bodies in water. The South River, the Chattahoochee.
The police were soon convinced that the killer was washing the bodies. If there are going to be fibers on there, I'm going to wash the bodies and dump them into a body of water. It didn't work. It may have been harder for the forensics people at the GBI and the FBI to get the fibers off, but the fibers weren't washed off.
A police stakeout on the Chattahoochee led to Wayne Williams. An officer heard a splash, then stopped a car on the bridge above. The driver was Williams. Another body surfaced there 2 days later.
Investigators specifically want advice on the latest case. The body of Nathaniel Cater was found just about a mile downstream from this bridge along South Cobb Drive last month.
Police arrested Williams on June 21st, 1981, weeks after he was first questioned. A grand jury indicted him for the murders of two men, Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. A judge also allowed prosecutors to present evidence related to 10 of the child victims.
It was 2 intense months, the trial was.
Jurors convicted Williams on February 27th, and he started serving life in prison.
I did say jigsaw puzzle, and I did say we'd put the pieces there where they could see the big picture.
Within days, the Special Police Task Force closed 24 cases and linked them to Williams.
With the conviction of Wayne Williams, we have reviewed all of the evidence that's present today, and as a result, we've cleared 23 cases.
He did not stand trial in any of the child murders the task force investigated. no one ever has.
But insofar as closing out the files, what you sense is the political pressures were enormous. And there was so much pressure on Atlanta to get this to go away, that a decision was made to close out a number of these files, attribute it to Wayne Williams, so we could get back to business.
So the city could move on.
Correct.
Catherine Leach's son, Curtis, was one of the so-called pattern cases. 40 years later, she still has questions.
You know, a lot of people ask me, do I believe Wayne Williams killed Curtis? I say, the way I take it, if Wayne Williams killed Curtis, why didn't you try him for killing Curtis so I can come to court, so I can see, so I can get some relief in my heart.
This is not the first review since the Williams trial. In 2005, DeKalb Police Chief Lewis Graham reopened 5 cases.
This is not about the innocent or guilt of Wayne Williams. This is about open cases here in DeKalb County.
In 2007, the Williams defense team requested new DNA testing.
This testing finally settles the debate over whether Wayne Williams was the Atlanta child killer.
40 years later, theories about the murders persist. The Klan, the government, maybe a copycat. Atlanta Police Chief Erika Shields says there's no evidence to support a copycat. She says there is reason to believe some cases did not fit into the larger investigation. So you're thinking it's possible of the 30, X number might have had nothing to do with the serial killing?
Correct. It's 40 years later. We're not under the pressures that they were. I'm not making excuses, but I'm just saying we have breathing room to do the job properly.
One name is most closely linked to the Atlanta child murders, Wayne Williams.
But the families of the young victims want you to know their names. 40 years later, they are closer than ever to a lasting memorial.
Back then when all the kids was getting missing, and I was looking at it on the TV, I said, wow, I sympathize with these other mothers that kids are being, taken off the street and killed, and not knowing that that was gonna happen to me. So when that happened to me, boy, I was just, I don't know, I just went out. I'm not gonna give up.
In 2019, Catherine Leach is stronger, but still grieving. She uses both emotions to help other families cope with unspeakable loss.
You can live with it, but you'll never forget.
40 years ago, this mother of 4 boys was desperately hoping her son was not the latest name on the list of Atlanta's missing and murdered children.
He real smart, and I love him, and I want him home.
13-year-old Curtis Walker ignored his mother's warnings and snuck out of the house. Searchers found Curtis 3 weeks later in the Chattahoochee River.
The body was identified just a few minutes ago by the medical examiner as that of Curtis Walker.
His mother lovingly remembers Curtis as a mama's boy who loved to draw.
I think about him every single day, most especially the holidays, like his birthday and Christmas, and but I dream about him a lot, but I never see his face.
Anthony Terrell is one of a handful of people who understands.
For 40 years, I haven't got over it, and I don't think I never will.
He was only 8 years old when his brother Earl disappeared. It sounds like your childhood changed dramatically.
Yes, and when it changed, it changed. It went from not knowing what the outcome gonna be. Is my brother coming home? Sitting at home every day, used to be, because me and my brother, we was tight. We was always together, walked to the store together. Everywhere we went together. But there was no more togetherness.
Earl disappeared on the way home from a neighborhood swimming pool. Anthony was not with his brother because one of them had to go home to babysit. Did you ever think, Anthony, at some point, and you would have been a little boy at this time, but did you have those feelings of it could have been me? Because it was really a flip of a coin. One go to the pool, one go to the house.
I still have those feelings.
Anthony Terrell and Catherine Leach tragically have much in common. Both say Atlanta police mistreated and accused their families in the days after their loved ones disappeared. And both are skeptical that Wayne Williams is the killer. Both are members of a task force working on recommendations for a special memorial.
And please put the names out there and make it known. Because for 40 years, nobody knew this.
But the only thing that really, if they don't get in it or find the killer who killed Curtis, one thing I want them to do, and one thing I know that will really give me a lot of ease in my heart, that they get this memorial plaque for these children so we can have somewhere to go and memorialize our children.
Recent documentaries and podcasts have renewed interest in the story of convicted killer Wayne Williams.
Channel 2 investigative reporter Mark Winnie, one of only a handful of reporters to ever interview Wayne Williams in prison. Mark continues to follow developments all these years later.
I feel like we asked the hard questions, the questions that needed to be asked.
In 1995, Channel 2 investigative reporter Mark Winnie and now retired photographer Rick Nelson spent 24 hours in prison. They were working on a special report documenting life behind bars.
And we encountered him, began talking, and he knew, of course, WSB-TV, and he agreed to sit down for an interview. And he was expansive. It was a long interview.
A long interview about Atlanta's missing and murdered children.
What do you want to say to the families that may be watching this, that haven't heard you for a number of years?
Well, the main thing I'd like to say is that, you know, like anybody else, I hope to have my day in court to ultimately prove that I didn't have anything to do with this. But something that's more important is that these families have never had their day in court, because after all, I was convicted for 2 adult murders. I have never been convicted for killing anybody's child. And these cases remain unsolved.
The 2 young men you were convicted killing. Did you kill them?
No, I didn't. I never met either victim in my life.
24 years after that interview, Williams continued to deny that he had killed anyone. This spring, he called into a community meeting.
We could demand that some answers come out now that we're in a position to do something about it.
Williams has his supporters. The Wayne Williams Freedom Project has a website and a Facebook presence. They believe this new investigation may actually exonerate the man who has spent decades behind bars.
You believe Wayne Williams is innocent?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
And you're now involved with the Wayne Williams Freedom Project?
Yes, I always have been involved. And I said this many years ago, it was going to take a new set of eyes to crack this case.
And while some of the victims' families believe Williams was not the one who killed all of those children, others insist he was. Just this year, Channel 2 has interviewed several men who believe they escaped becoming victims as well.
And I should have known when he told me, I can't let you out of that car. He had made his mind up that he was going to do what he was going to do.
The man who picked you up, the man who reached over to grab you, was Wayne Williams. You are 100% certain.
I be buried that way.
This latest review of dozens of murder cases is only just the beginning. Atlanta's police chief says it may take years. Channel 2's Dave Huddleston asked the mayor about that.
Is there a deadline, Mayor, for when you want this to be completed, or is it indefinitely?
There is no deadline. It's indefinite as long as it takes. And I just want to caution the public not to be disappointed if there's nothing else there.
Channel 2 will continue to follow any developments in the Atlanta child murder investigation, and we'll be there when the Memorial Task Force makes its recommendations.
Thanks for being with us. Good night.